Okay, so we're gonna just take a look at what the Senate has been working on with 941, H 941. So bearing in mind that we've also got the Senate miscellaneous ag bill. We could, in theory, drop it into that bill. So we what we're going to be looking at should sound familiar because the Agency of Agriculture came in last week and essentially presented this as a concept, I think.
Okay.
So thanks, Bradley.
You are very welcome. And Bradley Showman, Office of Legislative Counsel. And I'm presenting the Senate version of H 941. So it was a strike all amendment. And so this bill, the first difference is in the purpose section. So this bill goes into Taft Street more specifically. As in the House bill, I think it just establishes that it's the intent for farms not to, or for municipalities not to regulate farming. The Senate bill goes into calling out Taft Street, having reversed at least the last 20 years of law. And so it says that more specifically. I think the community is probably a little bit more interested in the meat and potatoes, so I'll just kind of skip past that.
Okay.
And go into the bill itself. So Section 2 starts where Section 2 of the House's version of H 941 left off. And should zoom this. There we go. The House version of H 941. So we start with language that we're familiar with: farming that meets a municipal under bylaw may not regulate or shall not regulate. So municipal bylaw shall not regulate farming that meets the minimum threshold criteria and the required agricultural practices rule. We refer to the RAPS rule a lot, so we wound up abbreviating it, and is therefore required to comply with the RAPS rule, except. And then so there are three exceptions. The first two are carve-outs from the RAPS, or carve-outs from things that could be subject to the RAPS. So notwithstanding subsection C, which is the poultry section, notwithstanding subsection C of this subdivision 1, that the raising, feeding, or managing of livestock on a farm with less than 1 contiguous acre is subject to applicable municipal zoning bylaws, including when a person is engaged in other farming activities that are subject to the RAPS rule. So essentially, up until this point, you could be farming blueberries, selling over $2,000 worth of blueberries, and your entire farming operation is subject to the RAPS. So if you had like a pig or two, that pig would be subject to the RAPS, even if that pig was not income generating or anything of the sort, right? And so what this does is, with respect to the raising, feeding, or management of livestock on less than 1 acre, that is going to be subject to municipal zoning bylaws, period, even if the RAPS apply to that land. And then so that's a complete carve out.
So you just pause there for a second. This is anywhere in any town, any part of town.
Yeah, that is correct. So this is not limited to downtown areas, tier 1, tier anything. This is statewide. Any municipality that chooses to regulate this activity with bylaws can do so.
On an acre, less
than an acre. But only with respect to the raising, feeding, or management of livestock.
Okay, so livestock here means poultry?
It does not mean poultry because there's a notwithstanding clause, and below subdivision C will prohibit the municipality from regulating by bylaw the raising, feeding, or management of poultry.
When we see the word livestock generally in this title, it does include poultry?
It would without the notwithstanding. That's correct. Yeah. Item number 2 here is, and this is not my, let me actually This is not the clean version, so I apologize, but this is the latest version. Notwithstanding subdivision C of the subdivision 1, that the raising, feeding, or managing of livestock on a farm with at least 1 contiguous acre and less than 4 contiguous acres shall have a sufficient land base for appropriate nutrient waste management as determined by the Secretary of Agriculture to be exempt from regulation by municipal zoning bylaws. So if you were on 1 to 4 contiguous acres, you're farming on 1 to 4 contiguous acres, and you're raising, feeding, or managing livestock, before you are exempt from regulation by municipal bylaws, the Secretary of Agriculture has to have made the determination that the raising, feeding, or managing of livestock has sufficient land base for appropriate nutrient and waste management to be subject to the RAPS rule and therefore exempt from municipal zoning bylaws. So it's a little bit of a curious exception, but it's instead of just carte blanche, a municipality can regulate the raising, feeding, or management of livestock on 1 to 4 acres. It gives the Secretary of Agriculture the authority to come in, make that determination that, okay, this is farming and you have a sufficient land base here to regulate that nutrient waste management. You're going to be subject to the RAPS and therefore exempt from municipal regulation. The next change is for swine waste in downtowns or village centers. And municipalities shall not prohibit swine or swine waste or regulate swine waste related farm structures on a farm subject to the RAPS rule. So you can't prohibit these activities. Municipalities may set a performance standard related to swine waste pursuant to section 4414 of this title to reasonably regulate swine waste in downtowns or village centers if the waste is causing a significant adverse impact to the community and the municipality has determined that the Secretary of Agriculture, Foods, and Markets is unable to provide redress through the application of the RAPS rule. Performance standards shall not have the effect of prohibiting swine or swine waste in a municipality. So municipalities can set performance standards, and those are essentially guidelines for, most often you'll see them in noise and kind of those types of nuisance, setting guidelines of volume or control and things of that sort. And so this would give municipalities the authority to set a performance standard related to swine waste in particular. And this is an authority that municipalities have not had before. And so there's a carve out in law, and there's a notwithstanding clause later on in this bill. There's a carve out in law that says that municipalities can't regulate animal manure and the absorbent bedding in their solid waste management. And so this would permit, with respect to swine waste in downtowns and village centers, would permit municipalities to make those kinds of bylaws and regulations for the first time. Municipalities shall provide at least 30 days notice with opportunity to cure to the secretary and the farm prior to enforcing a performance standard related to swine waste. So if a municipality is going to first of all, make this performance standard, second of all, enforce it, it will have to give 30 days notice with the opportunity to cure. So the farmer will have the opportunity to fix whatever problem it is, or at least try to, and prior to enforcing a performance standard for swine waste. And then here's your notwithstanding clause: notwithstanding any other provisions of law to the contrary, for purposes of this section, swine waste includes animal manure and the absorbent bedding of the animal. So this notwithstanding clause is in there because there are other provisions of law that say that municipalities can't make bylaws like this. And so this will kind of carve out that exception for this limited purpose in downtowns and village centers.
It's about that. Representative Boston.
Do you know where all the stuff about swine came from? Because we took an awful lot of testimony and nobody ever mentioned any concerns about pigs at all.
We do know.
I mean,
Why don't you answer what you know, Bradley? Yeah.
Yeah. So what I know is that there is a pig farm in Orleans in the downtown center. It is 4.5 acres. It is subject to the required agricultural practices rule, and a lot of people are upset about it. And so there's a lot of news reporting and things of that sort about that particular farm.
Okay,
And so that's because of the size of that farm too, it is over 4 acres. It's subject to the RAPS.
Yeah.
And it met, as far as I understood, based on my conversations with Steve, it was in large part, there may be some deviations, but in large part following the RAPS. So there wasn't much that the town could do to mitigate the smell of the manure.
okay.
It's, what the old commission? It's your commission stuff. So, not a good thing.
So you think they caught something we missed?
No,
No,
no. We did not have testimony on it directly, I don't think, but it came up, when it went to the House Environment.
Oh, that's not me.
That's the system, I think it's blinking here.
Oh, did we lose internet?
Oh. Look at that.
All right.
I don't know if I've ever seen that happen.
It's fine on Zoom, which means.
There we go. Yeah, we're good.
Probably good on the left.
So it seems to.
Times.
They
I'll write that
said they
down.
were gonna replace them. I'll report it
Um,
again.
No, so the House Environment Committee took testimony from all the stakeholder, or all the people with an interest, including the League of Cities and Towns, and they brought it up there. And
So was it in our version when we passed it out? I don't remember.
no, they brought up this particular instance of a farm
Yeah,
in whatever town it is. Well, yes, yeah, as an illustration of how the existing law isn't working. And this is, I think, the end result of those conversations. So this is pretty much part and parcel what the agency would like to do. So it's coming from the agency through Senate Ag, agency looking to try and address the concern that the league brought up. Does that sound right?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah.
I think so.
John?
the highlighted text and this draft, is that changes between Senate drafts?
No, that's changes between drafts of this amendment. And so this is this is not the clean version. I thought I had it saved on my computer.
Drafts, Senate drafts.
Yeah, in the Senate drafts. Right.
Which, so.
This is the final language. Yeah.
So really, a lot of the underlying text is all new.
Yes.
Most of it is going to be new to us.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. Almost all the underlying text is new.
Make sure they get it right.
I apologize. I didn't realize that this was the highlighted version, so I pulled it up. So my apologies.
And I don't think we've ever dealt with anything called a performance standard before in this committee. So is it a construct that's used in other?
Yeah. It's a common thing that municipalities do to set standards for how to deal with a certain thing without completely banning it, right? So you can't ban all noise, right? But you could put some restrictions on maybe decibel levels, hours, and things of that sort. And so that would be the idea, is to kind of use that existing framework for regulating swine waste. And so what that could mean is that a municipality could require a farm to export its swine waste on a certain schedule. That might be an acceptable performance standard. I say the word might be because this is uncharted, right? Because municipalities up until this point have not actually been able to set these standards or largely regulate farming in their areas anyway. But that might be an example of something that they could do. What they could not do, though, is say you can't store your swine waste because that would effectively prohibit it. And that is something that they are restricted from doing. So there's some guardrails on the ends, so to speak, on the but the municipality does leave the municipality some broad leeway to kind of determine what those standards are in downtowns and village centers. And so it's important to also remember that. So it is limited in that. So you could have a 10-acre farm in a downtown and village center, and they could do that. But outside of those downtown and village centers, they cannot.
So there is a definition of downtowns coming up here in Village
There
Center.
is, and it refers to a statute, and I can pull that up just to
When
share.
we get there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
So it's really up to the municipality as far as how high the bar is for the performance standard, as long as it doesn't prohibit swine.
Yes, yeah, and so it does say reasonably regulate, so it's, they do have to be reasonable. So that, I mean, that's not a set in stone standard, obviously, but it is something. It's not nothing. And but you're correct that the municipality can have some good leeway to make those determinations in downtowns and village centers.
Are there odor ordinances as far as, is there a way to measure that the way there are for decibels?
I don't know if there's a way to specifically measure smell in the way that you measure that you measure decibels. I think that those are more nuisance, right? And then so it's kind of like a more fungible standard.
I don't know if there's no stink meter.
So we all agree, right? That's fine, so
It's
Get used to it.
you
6 cents.
you have to know the situation to understand the situation and the gravity of it, and it's and it's not just its location. It's the sightliness of it, the whole 9 yards, I thought. I had thoughts, but I'm not. It needs not ought to be there unless they really change their practices.
yeah. But interesting, it's meeting RAP requirements.
Yeah. It's
Should be a tourist destination.
Reverse tourism.
Orleans, is a beautiful village, and Ethan Allen's there, and has great history, and that was the old commission sales building. It's a livestock rolled in on Sunday and we're all gone on Tuesday. And they cleaned up, waiting for the next batch to come through, and back in the day, it was a working dairy, way back, and it got morphed into this deal, and it is what it is.
There's nothing in this language that would give a municipality the ability to regulate smell, right?
I mean, that could be a potential performance standard.
It could be.
It could be.
Okay.
In like a nuisance type way, it could be,
Figure out a way to measure that.
yeah.
Right. All right, so is that looks like the end of the swine.
Yes, that is the end of the swine. And so here is the growing plants piece. So this language is in the House version. The cultivation or other use of land for growing plants, including for food, fiber, Christmas trees, maple sap, horticulture, viticultural, and orchard crops. So this is a broader definition of plants because they're putting fiber and Christmas trees in there. I can't remember if viticulture is in the House version, but there's it's a little bit brighter. So it's not necessarily plants for food, and the House version also has for sale or donation, right? And so it gives a person the ability to sell, and this doesn't necessarily do that. And this version highlights that cannabis is separately regulated and excluded from this specific exemption, right? So if we'll recall, there is a statute that's in Title VII that gives cannabis the same essentially protection from municipal regulation that other agricultural products have. Well, I should say other agricultural products because cannabis is not an agricultural product, right? It's not subject to the RAPs. But it effectively gets that same municipal exemption and it gets that same, it works in that same mix by reference in a different statute. That is preserved. And so that is untouched. But what the Senate's goal here is to make sure that cannabis doesn't also get this additional protection that the bill would give using land for growing plants.
Representative Lipsky.
Bradley, the word fiber. Yeah. Was a form of fiber. And straw. What they put under the notion of fiber.
I think it
Does
would,
it include hemp?
it would, I think it would. Yeah, arguably it could, yeah, arguably it could include those things. And I think that that's why they wanted to focus on cannabis, saying that that's not there because it might be a slippery slope to that piece. And so they clarified that cannabis is separately regulated and excluded from this exception.
And I guess I'm wondering whether we need to say, does this definition of cannabis include hemp? Because we mean to say hemp is also not part of this.
I think this would permit hemp.
It would permit hemp.
I think so. I think so. So long as it meets those definitions. As long as it meets federal standards, those ever-changing federal standards.
I can't see how it would unless cannabis is defined to not include hemp. Because anyone can say cannabis, hemp is cannabis, no question.
You're correct.
So unless somewhere it says cannabis does not include hemp, that would exclude hemp.
Okay.
Has to.
Well, we have, Bradley's the only lawyer in the room, I think. Well, no, maybe
We can-
not.
Yeah. And we can kind of go into it because hemp, hemp and cannabis are just, perhaps not in the future, but there are subject to different sets of regulations. Hemp is considered an agricultural product, whereas cannabis is not considered an agricultural product. And so that's kind of up until this point really been the focus on that. But if you want to look at the actual genetic makeup of the plant and things of that sort, it might behoove the committee to clarify that piece, right? And so I think up until this point, we're thinking about things like what is an agricultural product, what is not an agricultural product. If we wanted to make sure that people could grow hemp, perhaps put that in there.
And right now, people can grow hemp in a non-agricultural way for their own use.
I'm not familiar enough with the restrictions on that piece.
I guess we should just better understand whether we would be creating a new right for hemp on a small scale personal use if we made it clear that cannabis and hemp are different things.
Yeah. That's something I can look into a little bit more fully. Take it back to you folks.
Okay. Richard.
So in Vermont, I believe it's still in Vermont statute, people can personally grow their own cannabis plants.
I think so.
6 plants or whatever. This doesn't preclude that, does it?
It should not because cannabis is regulated separately. So that's what this is meant to say, is that it's regulated separately, right? And so people, and I can't remember the specifics, but it's meant to not touch those other regulations or create any kind of uncertainty around that. It's just to kind of say your cannabis is, from this specific exemption, your cannabis is kind of cordoned off.
Could probably fix it just by saying cannabis excluding hemp. It's definitely regulated. Not included in this section, something like that.
Yeah, let me
And from.
But if that is also going to cause, let me look into that a little bit more about kind of what that would actually entail from a practical point of view.
Also just wondering, how whatever the intent is here, how that differs from our original language. When we put 941 together, how do we treat him?
So we have. And then so we'll have the definitions of downtown and village center. And so I have to pull these up because this is usually Ellen's purview. It's where she kind of takes the reins. And she is not available at the moment.
You know, if you want, Bradley, we could just hold off until, and then dive into those definitions.
I think that'd be great.
Yeah, at a time. I know that there are designations and they were part of the, envisioned as part of the tier 1 or A and B definitions, I think was downtowns and village centers would be eligible for those tiers. So those are formal, official.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And the definition here is designed in such a way because those things are changing and some things are set to expire. And so the reason Ellen put these definitions in the way that they are is to kind of encapsulate where they could be in the future. As opposed to initially we had the actual definition of downtown and village center kind of cut and paste into this provision. But as those concepts and Acts 250 and things like that kind of evolve, we thought it would be better to, and the committee agreed that it would be better just to kind of have a reference to kind of encapsulate those things as they develop in the law. But basically, the short of it is if it looks like a downtown center and village center, and it acts like a downtown and village center, and it is a downtown and village center. So it's an interesting little definition, but we'll go into that a little.
Just on that question, village centers are downtown. I think in 181, that's they had to be equipped with municipal water and municipal sewer.
And
So it's statutorily, it can look, smell, whatever, like a village center.
that's true. No, no, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. You know, it's not just visuals and things of that sort. There's usage and the definition is actually pretty robust, which is why I wanted to pull it up.
So is it
actually like
everybody okay if we leave that hanging though, just because they know Bradley's only got 10 minutes and we can then have Ellen come in too and dig into it more and ask more questions.
And so section 3 here is this is amendments to the RAPs. And so this is a pretty significant deviation from the House version of this. And so this is section 3 of the RAPs, and these are the eligibility criteria, like the $2,000 threshold, the farming X number of animals on more than 4 acres. And so this is the beginning section of the RAPs, and they've added persons engaged in farming and agriculture practice subject to this rule are not subject to municipal zoning bylaws, except that the raising, feeding, or managing of livestock on a farm with. And so this reiterates those exceptions that were brought up into statute a little bit earlier. A farm with at least 1 acre and less than 4 contiguous acres shall meet the requirements of subdivision C5, which talks about the land base and sufficient nutrient management of the section to be exempt from regulation by municipal zoning bylaws. And number 2, on less than 1 acre is subject to applicable municipal zoning bylaws, even when a person is engaged in other farming activities that are subject to the RAPS rule. And so those are just kind of reiterating the things that are in statute, put down here into the rule. And then just some changes in language because we added these bits into the rule. We had to kind of reformat the RAPS rule more broadly. And so this should look familiar. It's just the formatting is different. And so with the RAPs, you're subject to the rules if you meet any one of the criteria, right? if you have a sufficient land base, if you have X number of acreage, you're doing X activity, or you have X amount of income, you're subject to the RAPs. And so that doesn't change that, even though this looks like it's changing, that doesn't change. You meet any one of these criteria with the exception of raising, feeding, or managing livestock on 1 to 4 acres. And so the $2,000 threshold is maintained in S323. It's actually raised to $5,000. And so the Senate took that piece out of their what they had done previously. The other exception is preparing, tilling, fertilizing, planting, protecting, irrigating, and harvesting crops for sale or for charitable contributions of farm crops that are allowable under 26 USC section 170C. And that are made to an organization that is unrelated to the owner of the land on a farm that's no less than 4 contiguous acres. So farms can't, if you're donating farm crops to be, if you're farming your land for the sake of donating your farm crops, you can't necessarily just be donating them to yourself or to another organization that you control. It has to be kind of a bona fide transaction, so to speak. On no less than 4 contiguous acres. So it has to be at least 4 contiguous acres in size. And then these things that we're familiar with, you're raising, feeding livestock on no less than 4 contiguous acres, this number of livestock. So if you have a plot of land, at least 4 acres, and then these are the number of livestock that would trigger the RAPs. And then other types of livestock combinations and numbers as determined by the secretary. And then here are some changes. So this is, this would be C5. So, and this is the 1 to 4 acre piece. So you're raising, feeding, or managing livestock on a farm that is at least 1 contiguous acre and less than 4 contiguous acres and has sufficient land base for appropriate nutrient and waste management. So the secretary has discretion to determine after consultation with the appropriate municipal authority if the land base is adequate to properly manage the number and type of livestock while evaluating whether compliance with the RAPs is reasonable or impractical. So again, it's that earlier exception that we're talking about on raising, feeding, or managing livestock on 1 to 4 acres. If the secretary has determined that the land base is sufficient for appropriate nutrient waste management and compliance with the RAPs is reasonable, then it'd be subject to the RAPs and therefore exempt from municipal regulation. You're raising, feeding, or managing livestock on less than 1 contiguous acre or on between 1 and 4 contiguous acres in a municipality that lacks ordinances or bylaws to regulate livestock. And the secretary determines after an opportunity for hearing that livestock are causing significant adverse water quality impacts and the required agricultural practices rules should apply to protect water quality. And so this piece of the RAPs, if you're raising, feeding, or managing livestock on less than 1 contiguous acre, the secretary can determine that the RAP should apply with respect to water quality only. However, as seen in the statute, this would not subject you to the RAPs rule more fully, and it would not exempt you from municipal regulation of that agricultural activity. So what this does is there's a carve out for raising, feeding, or managing livestock on less than 1 contiguous acre that is always going to be subject to municipal regulation of agriculture. And if there is a problem with water quality, the secretary can come in and make the determination that the livestock are causing a problem with water quality and demand that the place be in control with the RAPs with respect to water quality only.
How do farm structures work on this? Because I was just thinking of, if I had 3 greenhouses or high tunnels, on less than 1 acres, that would fall under municipal zoning for structures.
So farm structures are not subject to municipal bylaw, period.
Under 1 acre.
It's only raising, feeding, or managing a livestock.
So our version was a little bit different, right?
It is, yeah.
We said that if you're under 3/4 of an acre, town could regulate setbacks.
I think so.
That was in tier 1 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
That
3/4 of an acre. Yeah.
and then the tier 1.
That was originally, and we got rid of that.
Okay.
We passed, yeah.
But the the sort of new, like hoop barns you're seeing that are multi-purpose that could have livestock in them, then that would fall under?
So if it is a farm structure that is subject to the required agricultural practices rule, so I mean, it would have to be subject to farm required agricultural practices rule first, right? Then it would be exempt from municipal zoning bylaws. And so, I mean, if it's a farm structure, but actually it's supposed to be an apartment building or something, well, housing is never subject to the RAPS rule, right? You know, farm housing is never subject to the RAPS rule anyway. That's always going to be subject to municipal bylaw. But you know, is it a farm structure or is it, you know, a data, not a data center, but you know, something else, right? You know, I think the secretary would have to make that determination first. But there isn't a carve out in this bill that would prevent, that would permit a municipality from regulating that activity by bylaw.
Data center for the accessory on farm business.
Maybe not a data center. Maybe not a data center. I'm not following that bill. So that was a bad example.
Ron,
Okay, just I have a couple minutes left and I do have to get out of here. No, you're good. And then the 1040F piece is maintained. So if you're, that's one way to be eligible for the RAPS if you're filing a 1040F. And then some has a prospective business or farm management plan approved by the secretary describing how the farm will meet the threshold requirements of the section. So kind of like a little bit of a catch-all. And then the rest of this does not amend the RAPS in any meaningful way. It just changes some language and just clarifies that this is the agricultural practices. This is the definition of agricultural practices that are not subject to municipal zoning bylaws, but none of this has changed. It's just adding that language in there to kind of take a belt and suspenders approach to explaining that.
can you just take a minute, Bradley? And I know I don't want you to be late for your next question, but the poultry section.
Okay. We skip that. The raising, feeding, and managing a small backyard poultry flock, excluding roosters. So this is carte blanche carved out from regulation of municipal bylaw. And so you'll notice that the definition of small is not defined. It's just left to a municipality. And so a municipality could make the determination. I think small is 9. And someone might disagree with that and potentially appeal it. But so small is not defined. And I think that in terms of testimony and things, I think there just isn't a consensus definition of what small might actually be.
That's something we need to try and figure out. And that's different from our bill had a different way of approaching poultry. The
Yes.
poultry exemption.
Yeah, the House bill permitted municipalities to regulate backyard poultry, but it said that you can't prohibit backyard poultry. And so if you choose to regulate it, you just can't prohibit it. Things of that sort.
Effectively.
Effectively. Yes, that's right. That's right.
There's also been a question raised about ordinances versus bylaws,
Mhm.
which we are working on just to pull.
Yeah.
To say that out loud,
Right. And that's the bill.
right? Well, thank you for that.
All right.
A quick overview. We'll dig back into this tomorrow if there's time. Again, we don't have the bills officially saying we're working on this in the context of 323. We wanted to plug it in there.
I do have to run.
Okay,
Thanks so much.
We, just before we wrap up here, and if anybody needs to go, we're just about done, but if anybody wants to react or has any questions, immediate questions.
I want to introduce our guest sitting
Yes.
in the corner. That's Representative Lucy Boyden's father.
Oh, welcome.
Mark Boyd.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Have we had you,
Jack, over it.
had you in before, I think, maybe?
I've spoken a few times about
Food.
these things, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Beavers to school.
Yeah,
Well, good. You came in at an interesting.
just might be a little fly on the wall here, so. Give some time.
What did you do, buy a new tractor?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm size big time.
That tractor? Oh, yeah, it's big.
All right, John's got a question here or a comment.
I'm just going back to this cannabis piece. Isn't the other bill where we're dealing with cannabis? We're handing regulation over to the Cannabis Control Board anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe this is fine because it is separately regulated.
Yeah,
So either hemp or cannabis, the way this is, what it says, cannabis is separately regulated and is excluded from this exception. If the other bill goes through, it will be separately regulated. So does that mean this is okay?
yeah, I don't know if that's a good question.
I mean, so as far as I'm concerned, the main issue I see with this is there's not a definition for small flock.
Small flock of poultry, yeah. Also,
What?
100 pounds.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'll get my scale.
What?
I get my scale, you catch the birds.
The bill that we passed, we originally were talking about the right to food, and it was plants and poultry, and then the plants got expanded. In our bill, we added flowers, ornamental, and in the Senate version, they've added fiber. So that's something else we'll just have to, try and come to an agreement on.
You mentioned straw as fiber. Straw, fiber, I think is making cloth. So it'd be stuff like bamboo or wool or hemp,
Well, it's,
but it's
I just,
fiber.
there's a type of caning that for old chairs. And they twisted straw.
And I guess cotton, which is thistle.
Yeah. Flax.
Flax.
Flax is definitely fun. We had a whole thing in the cafeteria.
Goat and rabbit fibers for sure.
So I guess
It just was a different word struck me, John.
Just trying to think of what all would be included in fiber.
Yeah.
Straw was raised for bedding for years, but was in straw portion was never feed. Maybe.
betting on the list,
Actually,
No, except it is in the swine section.
good straw, make
the
sure it
gross
fresh cow.
crops for betting.
Fresh cow, next thing.
I don't know whether there's anybody in Vermont that's trying to regulate the growing of any of this small scale, other than hemp possibly, which is
Yeah.
as the federal concern, but I think that and I don't know whether this was always in the agency's version or not, but in any case, we'll hear other testimony and, we can be thinking too about whether we want to include this or not.
What's the process going forward? But they pass this out. They pass something out.
Yeah, so we've got two different ways that we could do it, and I think what we're gonna do is when we get 941, we'll just use that bill. And we will be taking sections 1 through 3 out of the Senate miscellaneous bill. Is that what you meant, Greg, or?
Yeah, I guess,
Okay.
how do we come to a agreement on?
Oh, okay.
It looks like that's actually gonna
So.
be signed by the governor.
Yeah, so if this version is okay, I think with the administration, we're gonna get, I think, some testimony from the farmers. I think that's important. And I'm not sure that we're gonna hear anything that is going to cause problems ultimately. We get to decide, right, in our committee. And then if we make any changes at all, it'll have to be another conversation with the Senate, either through they could amend it again, send it back to us, they could just concur with what we send, or we could have a conference committee.
Or we can concur with this and it's done.
Or we could just concur with this.
This
right,
and
yeah.
done, or we can amend it and
Yeah.
pass it out of our floor.
Right, so, just stepping back, that's absolutely right. There are 4 different ways this can go, at least, starting with, we could just concur. And then if we don't, if we amend it, then it's back in the Senate's hands to do those things too. We, I guess we could call for a committee of conference right now too. That's another possibility. Because they've taken our bill and amended it.
On which bill?
This one.
This one.
Yeah. The goal anyway is to pass something. You want to do that. So it's a priority, to get that done. And we may only have a couple weeks left in session, so we don't want to be lingering on it. Tomorrow, we've got the floor at 9:30. It won't be long. At 10:30, I think we're hoping, we were asked if we would set aside some time for the Land Access and Opportunity Board, LAOB, which is in the State House tomorrow for a Cedar Creek kind of presence. They asked if they could come in. We made,
It'll just come in perhaps after and
okay, good.
and then do you want in the afternoon? She's not available in the morning.
Okay, we'll consult on that. So Bill Driscoll, and then after lunch, I don't think we need to devote the whole afternoon to committee time, but if people are able to stay after lunch, we'll continue working on this. And I also want to just do sort of a straw poll. I don't think we're going to pass out 323 because the hemp section is still being worked on in GovOps. But we can get a little closer anyway to something.
We got the C portion too.
Yes, the seed portion, yeah. Yeah, it's now play.
Chair, not that I was very visible today, but tomorrow, after the floor session, I need to be down in Essex for the Loggers Expo for different panels that I'm sitting on
Okay,
and participating.
And the chainsaw racing competition and.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, anything else today?
Just one thing on hemp at the national level. If nothing changes, that kind of worst case scenario. Is that where you
Done your role.
consider agriculture?
You can go off,
Yeah, in a while.